Okay, good evening. I'm sorry, I said good evening. There you go. You all act like it's Wednesday night or something, and it's like hump day or something. So, what was that? Unstoppable, unshakable, unchangeable. Truly, that's not what we are, right? We're very stoppable, we're very changeable, we're very shakable, but we are made in God's image. And every so often, you get a glimpse of that in some people. You get a chance to glimpse somebody who, for some moments, is unstoppable. You get a chance to glimpse someone who's unshakable, right? And our testimony tonight, I think, is someone in our church that gives us a glimpse of how God can make someone unstoppable, unshakable, stable, there, present. And so it got me thinking about this person as I was praying through our prayer meeting, and got me thinking about, well, what's the kind of man I want to be? When I see this man that's going to give a testimony tonight, it makes me think, who do I want to be? And it makes me think about you. Who do you want to be as a person? Whether you're a young person in the back or older folks up front. Who do you want to be? Easy, easy. I'll come sit up front with you if it'll make you feel better, Ninny. Ninny. If I call anybody out, Ninny Redmond. Then Joshua 14 kind of got me thinking about that. It leads us into our testimony. Joshua 14 talks about Caleb. I love Caleb in the Bible. Caleb was one of two spies that when he went to the promised land, he said, we can take it. There was 12 of them, right? 12 of them. 10 came back and said, we can't do it. These giants are too big. We can't win. Joshua, who was kind of young and dumb, came back and said, we can do it. And Caleb, who had a little bit of experience, he came back and said, we can do it. They didn't listen to Joshua. They didn't listen to Caleb. And then I love this part because after 40 years in the desert, after Caleb going through so many hard times, after Caleb probably seeing so many people that he cared for and loved, or people that were naysayers and criticizers die off, they get to the promised land and they divide up the land, and Caleb gets one of the rougher parts. It still needs some cleaning up. It's still got work to do. There's work to be done when Caleb gets the land. It's not like you get to go there and retire and it's all going to be cozy and comfortable. And this is what Caleb says when he gets the promised land. In verse 10 of Joshua 14, he says, and now behold, the Lord has kept me alive. And he has said these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel wandered in the wilderness, and now here I am this day, 85 years old. As yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. He was ready for going out, and he was ready for coming in. And I love Caleb's attitude. I'm as strong now as I ever was. I'd like to think maybe that would be the way I want to be one of these days, If not physically, at least spiritually, right? Well, we've got a gentleman in our church who is 97 years young. His name is Carl Williams. And if you ever get a chance to stop and visit outside church services, especially after the 9 o'clock service or so, you ought to stop and visit with Carl. You will be the better for it, all right? And so Carl is going to come up and give his testimony with his lovely daughter, Sandy Gallagher, and they're going to share a little testimony before we go into prayer time. So Carl and Sandy, if you guys want to come on up.
I don't know about this here. I don't get used to. I have to get used to this because Oh, see, I have to get used to it. I'm almost afraid to talk into it. I'm afraid it'll say out what I sometimes don't want to say. But it's really nice to be here. I never realized what a great place this was until I came to live with Sandy and Harold, and the time that I've been here and the people that I've met have I'm very proud of. I stand here after service. We come to the early service, stand here after service and watch all these people come in. Everybody smiling, everybody happy. The children running around, and just, it's not like any other church I've ever seen. So I'm happy to be here.
That's because it's not like any other church we've seen, is it?
No, it isn't.
Well, I just have a little bit to say at the beginning, and it's sometimes in our ordinary lives, we recognize that there's more, that there's something extraordinary working in us and for us, even though we haven't met the one responsible, or to understand how it's possible. It's really everyone's story, but mostly it's God's story through all of us. And as Daddy and I have talked over the last several years about his life, we know that God had set him apart from the beginning for his own work. And there was no introduction, as you will find out. There was no Bible reading in his background. There was no church, but clearly the Lord's hand was upon him. And this is his story. So, you were born in Kirkwood, Missouri, September 11th, 1921. And that was the Roaring 20s. Yeah. So, and that makes you 97 years old.
No, wait a minute. I like the little kids when they're 7 years old, they can't wait for that 6 months so they can say, I'm 7.5. Well, I'm 97.5.
That's true. That's true. Okay. Well, we have some pictures up there for them to look at. Who are these wonderful people? And tell us a little bit about growing up.
Well, they got an arrow pointing at my belly. That's me. And my youngest sister and my mother. And on the other side, it's my dad, who loved to fish, and not only for the fun of fishing, but for food to go on the table. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And you were the eighth of?
Eighth of 9. 9 children. The only one that's younger than me was this one that's being held. And there I got my arrow again. Well, there's coveralls on, and there's a story about the coveralls. My sister, just older than me, took me up to a neighbor's house, and they had apples. So this young fellow that was always up to something, Jack Dye, he tied my sleeves and my pants legs down and put apples inside that for me to take them home. By the time I got home, I was crying because the stems were digging into my skin.
But they did share apples with you.
Yeah, they shared apples. Yeah. Well, that's was a way of life in my growing up. Everybody shared with whoever needed it.
Yeah. So the house that you lived in had 4 rooms for 9 children and 2 adults.
Yes.
And it's just remarkable, and I think hard for us to understand the differences in the way you grew up and the way that our children are growing up now. So you lived in a 4-room house, and there was beds in every room, I guess.
Just about. We had. I slept. We had people sleeping on the porch and on upstairs, and even in the attic. On a small house, while there just wasn't room for everybody, but we didn't feel like there wasn't room. That was what we did. That was our space. So it was the family was always and with that many people, you'd think somebody wouldn't get along, but there was no, all through life, from little to big, to what I am now, they, everybody got along. There's nobody that got mad at somebody else. Well, that was kind of the thing with Mom. Mom was the disciplinarian. Dad was just a loving man. But Mom was a disciplinarian, and we couldn't argue with one another. We couldn't get mad at one another. We couldn't even say "damn." That was a bad word. Nobody could do that.
No sassing.
No what?
No sassing.
Oh no, he didn't sass back. Everything was yes ma'am, yes ma'am, and not. It was in a loving way. It was something that I didn't see in many families.
So your mom, Elvie, you told me that she never learned to read or write.
No.
And but what did she do to contribute to the family?
Well, we had in our little house, we had a big garden next door, and she did mostly all the gardening, except with the help from the ones that were big enough to help at that time. But she did a canning. She even took in washed in number 2 wash tubs out in the backyard with the wringer that you do and whatnot, and she washed for other people. And when Daddy come home, then I'd get to go with him to deliver the wash to the different people.
And so your dad was a house painter.
Yeah, he painted houses, and he had different people that 2 people that he worked with. The Meanses, they were painters also, and Dad even mixed his own paint. He got the white lead in 5-gallon cans, and the different things that you put in paint, the paint thinners, and even the colors. And he'd mix his own paint for the different houses. He didn't go to the store and buy a gallon of paint. He mixed it.
So were you poor?
We didn't know we were. It was just like we were like everybody else. It was.
But you've told me too how frugal your father was, and
oh yeah,
how did he even manage to raise that many kids? And
well, it's now I think of it, and I don't know how in the world he ever did it, but he would. We didn't have any, never borrowed any money. He bought land or lots. There isn't like he bought acres, but he bought lots. And then and I'm not positive of, I was too young when this was going on, but I'm not positive if he bought them at the same time or he bought one at a time, but he bought them in line with one another. And my idea was that I thought, and it was probably pretty true, with 6 sisters, I figured that he bought these lots so when they got married, they could build and be next door down the line on Gallagher Road. But the first one that got married was Agnes. She married a local person. He was he worked in a butcher shop for Kroger store. He was a butcher, but everybody called him Doc because early in his life he worked in a pharmacy. But she was the only one that got the lot because the rest of my sisters married people like farmers, and so naturally they went to live on a farm with their husbands.
And your dad built another home on Peak Avenue and also a gas station, which is still in business at Peak and Gallagher Road
Yeah,
in Oakwood.
he had the corner lot, and what happened to that corner lot, these are things that I learned because I was too young to see it, but my two brothers, Ray and Chester, would take the 55-gallon drum and set it up on that lot on horses, and the people would come by there to get their coal oil, because at that time that's what you burned as coal oil. So they'd come and get their coal oil for their coal oil stoves and the lamps and whatnot. But then Dad cleared the lot and built a station there. It was a Shell station. That's when the pumps, you'd pump them up like this, and there'd be a big glass tube up there that you could see how far the gas went down, and there's a mark on there to tell you how many gallons you got. And so that was, and the house, he built a house next door to it. This was later on, whenever the girls got into teenage, and we needed more bedrooms.
So you didn't go to church?
No, we never
What
went to church. Well, the only time we'd go is a funeral or a wedding or something like that. But I figured it was just too much for us to do. Or my Dad, he was a Christian man. My mom too. They lived according to what they believed the Lord would want them, the way they wanted to live, and they raised us in the way that they thought was the right way, which we all thought it was good too. I didn't go to church. I've been to churches and whatnot, but I didn't go. I might to a church. I would go to visit somebody here and somebody there, but
You went visiting churches, more or less.
yeah, and visiting churches instead of belonging, until after the war and everything, I had my two girls, and we lived in a house that I had built. I built a house in 1950 in Kirkwood, and I had a contractor, but he let me do a lot of this work myself. And our neighbor across the street was a little girl that Susan wanted to go to church with. So she went to church with him, and when she came home, she said, she came and told us, Dad and Mom, that we just need to go to church. Those people are poor. They need us. So we started going to their church, which was in a house.
See what you guys, the kids, can do? You have that kind of influence. Yeah, you can do it. So jumping back, one thing I want to get to your beautiful car, your first car. It was a Model T, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you just want to tell the story. You had just met Mom not long before that, but tell the story about this car and what her mother's opinion was of it.
This car, and you can see it on the screen there, it was a full car when I got it, and it had a body on it and everything, but knowing me, that's me standing up in the back with a little jacket on. So naturally, knowing me, I had to tear it apart and see just how it was made.
Yeah, but you wanted to take her for a ride.
Yeah.
And my grandmother said? When I got to her house, she lived in Webster, and it was about 12 miles away, or 15 miles. And you could take something like that and put it on the road and drive it. At that time, nobody stopped you and said you couldn't. So and you had to sit on a gas tank. You can see the gas tanks. You sit on a gas. And I drove to her house and wanted to take her for a ride. Her mother walked out and said, "You take that thing and get out of here."
So I didn't
She
get to
said her
pick-
daughter wasn't going to ride on a gas tank anywhere, as I recall. I think
Yeah.
I heard her say that a few times. So we're going to jump ahead, and you grew up then. I think you graduated about 7th grade, and at that point you exited the school, but not sure that any of your other siblings went much farther than that, really.
No,
Everybody stopped and got a job, earned
yeah,
money for the
every-
house.
yeah,
Household.
none of us had, um, well, my younger daughter, sister, she went all the way through to high school, but no college. None of us had any college raising, and for me, I don't know how far my older siblings went. We didn't. It wasn't important enough to talk about, I guess. Anyway, but I quit school at from I went to the 7th grade, and then I quit and started working. Now, each one of my sisters would work in homes with people, taking care of kids, cleaning house, doing housework and whatnot, and they would contribute to the house, our family, for living. Well, whenever I started, when I quit school, I started working with mowing lawns. I had a push mower, and I'd mow lawns for different people. And one of the people that I mowed for was a party that one of my sisters was working with. And then another one was a lady my mother was doing laundry for and doing some cooking and whatnot. And she was a
Real estate agent.
real estate agent. So I would get to go and clean up the houses that they were going to sell and do things like that. And that's how I started out working, doing my bit.
Well, we have 1,000 stories. We
Yeah,
do.
we
It's just,
can't
it's
go
a lot
into
of
that.
fun if you want to sit and talk to him sometime. So then you joined the Navy.
Yeah,
In October 1942, you were 21 years old, and you went to the Great Lakes,
yes.
and you went through basic training, and then
Mhm.
you got on a new
A mine
minesweeper. It was
sweeper.
brand new, wasn't it?
Yes, it was down in
Alabama.
Alabama,
Mhm.
and we made runs there. We would practice out in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was a minesweeper, and I won't go into detail about how a mine is swept, but there was gear that we would put out into the water, and as we would make a pass, if there was a mine there, our gear would break the cord, the cable, and the mine would pop up on top of the water.
You can change
And-
the slide.
The reason we could do this is because they would set the mines, the Japanese would set the mines 15, 20 feet deep, and we would, our draft was only 10 feet. So in rough water, instead of the up and down, we got this kind of deal that makes you sicker than up and down pretty quick.
Mhm. So then you went to the South Pacific,
Yeah,
and you were there for a couple of years. You went to, let me see, you went to Australia. You were in the Battle of Leyte. You were in the Solomon and Mariana Islands, and you were escorting ships to Guadalcanal.
yeah. This picture is a picture of my minesweeper. It looks really big there, but when you put it alongside a
A real ship.
real ship,
Battleship.
battleship
Yeah.
or
Tanker.
airplanes.
Oh, an aircraft carrier?
Aircraft
Oh, my
carrier. Why we
goodness.
look like a pebble.
Yes, you would.
But we had, I was went aboard as a seaman, and through the years, which were not that many, but I got to be a first class, and they call it ship fitter, because I repaired most everything on a ship. I learned how to weld and the different ways you weld with electric and with, well, here what you see, that cloud of water there, that's what a mine looks like whenever you shoot it. We destroy the mines by shooting them with our guns, with the guns on the ship, 20 millimeters. And so you can see how much damage that could do to a hull of a ship if you hit it when it was under the water. And the one on the right, on my right, some of the guns are there. You can see them sticking out, but the big gun that was the gun I fired. The one that you can see that looks like it's pointing that way, but the 3-inch gun was up like over my shoulder. That we fired with that.
So
there was 4 of those 20 millimeters, 2 in that turret and 2 in the back. This is another minesweeper. We're parked alongside
Nope,
of
that's you.
another one.
That's the 126.
Yeah, that's the 126
Yeah.
too. That's the one I was on.
So the history of this ship is that you all rescued a downed flyer, you survived a typhoon, you had heavy air assaults from the enemy, and then at one point in 1944, then you headed back home to Portland for repairs.
Yes.
And then after the repairs, you moved down the West Coast and went down to Long Beach before they shipped out again, headed to Okinawa.
Yeah.
And something happened in Long Beach.
Yeah. While we were back in port, and of course, I was writing to my girlfriend, and she was writing to me, and I found out I was going to be in California. So there was another guy aboard ship. He was a radio man, and he lived in Webster. So Gene got a hold of his wife, and they decided to come to California. Bob had his wife, and he had a little girl. So his wife came to California with Gene,
And my grandmother said, "You may go, but don't marry him."
so as we were tied up at the port, I jumped ship, got a hold of Gene. We went, found a minister and a church that would marry us, and we got married.
And she wouldn't marry you unless you found a church, right?
Yeah, I had to be married, church. So.
Well, then we're just going to have to rush through this, Pop, a little bit. This is a picture of the Missouri. Many of you know that the surrender papers were signed on the Missouri, and you can tell them about going into Tokyo Bay briefly.
Yeah, we went into Tokyo Bay, and the Missouri came in and was parked on that side of the bay, and we were parked on this side. The signing went very well. I did get to go ashore on a Shark Liberty, and it was just really almost sickening to see the town that has been leveled by the bombs and everything. And So it wasn't something that you really wanted to see.
Right.
I had an incident there while I was there. We were anchored there in the bay, like I say, and a buddy and I were on a fantail, the rear part of the ship, and it'd been pretty hot, so we decided to take a swim. So we took a swim. I dove off, and he dove off, and I was swimming. I can't swim on top of the water, so I'm swimming under the water, and I come up, and I look up, and the ship is way the heck up away from me. And I didn't realize it, but there was a current going by there, the Japanese current, and when you anchor, the ship will be pointed up the current, and the current goes that way. So I was carried quite a way. So I just tried to work like mad to get back to the rope that we threw over the rope ladder, and get back aboard ship. So I come there getting lost at sea.
So throughout your time aboard ship, what was the spiritual climate there? Was there a chaplain or a church service or anything like that?
No chaplain aboard, no church service or anything. But you feel, even when you feel out like that, you're not alone. And we didn't talk to one another about the Lord or anything. We were tough guys, you know. But whenever the war was over, and we found out that it was, Bob is on the picture there with his wife, and that's Gene and me on that same side of the table.
On the right side.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob, we were standing there by the rail, and we started talking about it being over. And I think it was Bob that said, how many of those people you think is praying to God, thanking God for this to be over, and really knows that they had something to do with it? So it did come up once in a while about our belief that there is one up there.
So you returned home, and you built the house.
Yeah.
And your little bride there.
Yeah.
Enjoyed having you around.
Yeah. That's my car that I had when I left, and it was still there.
A better car than the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't put it back together. That's a different one.
So you became you worked at Rauscher Chevrolet eventually, and you worked there for 30 some odd years before you retired.
Yes, I was working at a before the war, I worked at a factory making piston rings, and it was McQuay Norris, and they said that they told the men that any of the young men that were wanting to get into the war or to help out, they would promise that we'd have a job when we got back. So when I got back, I went back to the factory, and I got my job. But I didn't really want to sit and make piston rings. I wanted to do something else. So my older brother was a mechanic, and I always admired him so much that I wanted to be a mechanic also. So I was talking to the station that I mentioned. There was Dad rented it to a couple brothers, Smith brothers, and they didn't make cough drops. Talking to Walter, and I thought maybe I could get a job there and learn how to do mechanical work. So I asked him, and he said, "Carl, if you really want to make some money, it's do body work. You be a body man." So I took him up on it, and I found a body shop that I could work with, and it was a one-man body shop, so there wasn't much I could do there. But it was in Kirkwood, and when he had a Chevrolet dealer in Kirkwood also, so I would go to this Chevrolet dealer, and I'd ask him after him for a job, and each time he'd say no, didn't have room. So finally, one time he says, "Well, you're here all the time. You might as well go to work." So he put me to work as a body man. That's the uniform that I started wearing whenever I was a body man. So I learned the trade of the body man, and I worked there and that, oh, by the way, that's the house that I was born in back of me there, after it's been added to.
That's the same that was a four-room house with just tar paper on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still standing.
Yeah.
It looks a bit different, though. So in my childhood, we did go to church.
Yeah. Yeah.
After we hounded you a bit, and we went to a Presbyterian church early on, and then when we started going to this little house church, it was an Episcopal church, and we got involved in that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the same as knowing the Lord, was it, for either of us?
No, not really.
Yeah.
But we went to another church when we moved to Creve Coeur.
It was another
we went to
Episcopal
another
church.
church
Mm-hmm.
there, and it was in a house, and we had to build a church.
Yeah.
So I was involved in building two churches.
But what you had said was that, we went there and we practiced the religion, but
Yeah.
we really were never encouraged to have a personal relationship with the Lord. And that came in about 1964, we figured. You want to tell what happened at that time with Ruth and Bob
Oh, yeah.
when they came to the house?
Jean had a sister, Ruth, and she was married to another man named Bob, and they lived in California. And we start hearing all kinds of things coming from California about these people. What were they doing? They were speaking in tongues and laying hands on one another and whatnot. Didn't know what
Talking about
was really,
Jesus all the time?
what.
And talking about Jesus all the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You couldn't get in. Every time you went together with them, they're cramming this stuff at you about Jesus and about this and that. So we decided to go out in California and find out what it was all about.
Well, I think Mom went out.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, we stayed back.
Yeah.
And she came back and thought something was really strange.
But then they came to visit us, and as they stayed there, we found out more and more about the Lord. And so I got to the point where I wanted to do whatever they were doing because it was so close to the Lord. And I even started speaking in tongues, praying, and so we had really had turned ourselves over to Him.
Yeah. And there was one night when you were trying to sleep and you woke up and you had a moment. You had a Jesus moment.
Yeah. Bob and Ruth were sleeping in the living room and on the floor because we had the house full, and I was wanting to say the Lord's Prayer, and I couldn't say the Lord's Prayer. The words wouldn't come out. I didn't know it. Here I've been doing it all the time, but at this point I just couldn't do it. So I went in and I woke up Bob, and tears were flying. Pardon me. And I told him, I want to say the prayer, but I can't say it. Now, for some reason, the Lord had stopped me and made me so I couldn't remember. I needed that experience with Bob and Ruth. So they tutored me, and I said it, and I was fine. I went back to bed. But that was an incident that I felt that afterwards, I felt that the Lord would not let me say it, and I had to admit to somebody that it was deep in me.
And it was all different from then on, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So a little sidebar on Ruth and Bob. They wrote a little book, but we knew this ahead of time. They lived in Upland, California, and I think and in Pomona, but I'm not sure where this occurred. But they started. My mom went to go. No, Ruth went to go visit this church called the Four Square Church, and so she was really taken by it. And she went another time, and I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, but at any rate, the Four Square Church is where Chuck Smith was pastoring. And for about a year thereafter, they had a home church in their living room, and Chuck Smith was there doing it. And then, surprisingly enough, we found out that he was the one who founded the Calvary churches, so the Calvary chapels, so of which we are a part. So that was pretty much the end of it. This man won't tell you. He has a servant's heart, and he has helped people all of his life. When I grow up, I want to be just like him. He is always looking for something to do, someone to help. He still mows our lawn for us, our farm for us. It's more than a yard. But we'll watch him, and he'll sneak across the road with the lawnmower and mow the neighbor's ditch so that they don't have to. Just as something that he does. But he's got a servant's heart, and he's always, I think, quite a bit like your dad. To be perfectly honest,
Yeah.
I didn't get to know my grandpa. He died when I was about a year old. But I want to share this with you because this was interesting. When he lived in St. Louis, he after he retired, he started caring for the elderly because, of course, he wasn't. And so he started out driving them to doctor's appointments and that kind of thing. And then he ended up working with them. And at one point, he even took care and gave respite to the families who had men who had Alzheimer's. So he would stay with the Alzheimer's patient and then give the woman, the wife, some relief. Little did he know that the Lord was preparing him, because it wasn't that many years later that my mom had Alzheimer's, and he had some experience on how to care for her. So, but while he's doing all this, he's also out mowing lawns for widows. And this is an article that was posted in the Kirkwood Webster Times. And it was, I guess, in the editorials or something. And it says, "Lawnmowers and Moral Lessons" is the name of it. "I live in a neighborhood that backs up to $1 million homes. 2 weeks ago, a lawnmower started at 7 a.m. and I thought, come on, that's rude. And last week, the lawnmower started up at 6 a.m. and I thought, that's really rude. So I put on my clothes, on over my pajamas, and drove to the house, thinking I could see several lawn people there. What I didn't see that. Instead, an elderly man immediately turned off the lawnmower, and when I caught his attention, I could read this really. I said, "Do you know what time it is? You started that lawnmower at 6 a.m., and I live right in back of this yard, and it's just too early." And his response in a very gentle tone was this: "I am very sorry. I did not think about the sound going that far. I have cut the yard for the owner of this house since her kids were little, And when the owner moved into this home, this big home, they still wanted me to cut their yard. I'm like family. My wife now has Alzheimer's, and if I'm not home when she wakes up, she gets lost in the house. I said, "How old are you?" And he responded, 88 years old. I told him to continue cutting the yard, and I gave him a hug. The moral is that before we come to the conclusion that people are just mean or uncaring, find out what's going on in their lives. Because of cell phones, email, and running from place to place, we're forgetting how to really listen. Slow down and find out why that lawnmower's running. You might be surprised. So we found that in the paper. And that's pretty much your story. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, so as we take just a few minutes here and we kind of close up shop, I wanted you to think about a couple things there. First of all, thank you so much, Carl, for sharing with us. Thank you, Sandy, for sharing with us. We were praying before this got started, and all those wonderful experiences that they shared, probably Carl's greatest testimony was sitting right next to him, right? That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool stuff to have Sandy there with him. The other is this. We were reading a book in our leadership group, and it talked about really what we're about as a church. And one thing it talked about is that as Christians, we're called to proclaim truth. And I've heard that in church since I was a little bitty boy. My testimony is different than Carl's, and then my family took me to church when I was very little on Wednesday nights, whether I wanted to go or not, and grew up in that. And I heard that from a very early age: proclaim truth, preach the gospel, proclaim truth, preach the gospel. And so this book said we as Christians are here to proclaim truth, but it also said that we are here as Christians to inspire faith. And that sometimes the disobedience inside of us, the sins that we just can't let go of, those sins that just won't go away, those struggles are maybe not so much a part of disobedience. That is a part, but maybe a lack of faith. And it talked about some research in Christian life that said that, yes, reading your Bible is a part of overcoming that huge obstacle in your life. And yes, coming to church. You heard Carl talking about different times, going to church, not going to church, visiting church. Went to church to get married. Good job, Carl, to go to church to get married. That was good. But it said that's a piece. Reading your Bible is an important piece. I don't mean to make it that it's not. Prayer is an important piece. But one of the biggest pieces we miss is the relationships. The relationships with good, strong Christian people that will keep you in the right directions. And it humbled me because I'll tell you, as a church leader a lot, I'm an advocate for preach the Bible, Mike. Teach the Bible expositionally. That's the most important. And Jared, do a good job leading worship. That's the most important. And kids, get up out of bed and, by gosh, don't be late for church and stop talking to people out there in the alcove. Come in and let's be cleaned up and let's all look good and sit down right on time for church and don't be late and stop visiting out there. Come in here for church. When maybe a really, really, really important part of helping ourselves to overcome those really powerful sins or whatever it is that Satan is trying to hold us back with might be that relationship piece. It might be taking a few extra minutes to visit with Carl, who's standing out there just watching everybody, just a watcher, loving watching our kids running around and visiting and having a relationship with someone who can encourage and strengthen you. So I say that because that's what I think of when Carl. I think about he'll talk to anybody and share with you and visit. I also think about the Bacons getting ready to start the small groups. So I pray that you get involved with that as we start to transition on Wednesday nights in April. Maybe you'll have a really neat Bible study there. Maybe you'll have a real neat moment of prayer. But maybe you'll just meet some really cool people in church that you click with and that you gel with. And they could be that couple, was it Bob and Ruth? That is a testimony today that I didn't know that was going to go back to Chuck Smith. That was powerful. But so maybe you could be that person for you to build a relationship. Last thing, we'll just close with prayer as a group, okay? Let's all pray together as we get ready to close, and then Jared will close us with song. But let's pray corporately. And I just want to share with you, sometimes if you don't know what to pray, I know Carl shared a moment where he just couldn't pray. Sometimes if you're struggling to pray, I would challenge you, maybe just open up Psalms, pick a psalm, and just kind of pray out loud the book of Psalms. So Psalm 91. Let's pray that together and we'll close. Psalm 91 says, the safety of abiding in the presence of God. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say for the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him I will trust.